think it's safe to say that silly season is well and truly underway. We'll talk about one of the big news stories to begin with. We've got Sergio Perez signing a brand new contract to take him through until the end of the 2026 season. A bit of a controversial move from Red Bull, I would say, simply because that Perez's results recently have been dropping off a little bit, and there are sort of better options out there, younger options out there. I mean, Seb, who would you just put in that seat straight away if they sort of announced that Perez won't be signing that new contract, for example? Who is more worthy of the seat than Perez, would you say, if you could list them off?
I think 80% of the grid, to be honest, at this moment. I think Yuki Tsunoda's obviously, for me, I think he's the most reasonable choice. Obviously promoting from within, it's something obviously Red Bull like to do, and his performances this season have been super consistent. That's the one thing we look at Sergio Perez, and it's his qualifying as well. Tsunoda's qualifying this season has been incredible, and that's where Perez, even if he's strong in the race, in qualifying he has to be strong in a race because he sets up himself from qualifying really poorly.
Yeah.
Tsunoda's qualifying pace has been super consistent throughout the year. I think if you put him in the Red Bull, I think he's consistent. He'll be consistently up there, and I think that his race maturity, it's come a long way in the past couple of years, and I think he would be absolutely great in that second seat for Red Bull. I don't think he's quick enough to challenge Max. I think he's still not on that sort of level, but I think he's good enough, and I think that he would be so much more consistent than Perez. Even Carlos Sainz, I can understand why they haven't gone down that route. Obviously in the past when they're at Toro Rosso, their dad's obviously not getting on and clashing, and the power struggle, that's something they don't want to have. But I don't think Tsunoda would bring that. I think that Tsunoda, they're going to lose him now at some point because 2 years he's not going to want to stick around that long, obviously with Aston Martin and Honda and things like that. So they've basically, by doing this, they've lost Tsunoda.
Yeah.
Daniel Ricciardo, I do think that sticking with Perez is a better decision than Ricciardo. I think that Ricciardo just he's inconsistent at the moment, and I think that's the one thing that you look at Perez and say that's his fault. So you have to bring in someone that's going to be better than that, and Ricciardo has not been that. So I don't think Ricciardo. But then if you look elsewhere on the grid, I think, this is biased, but even Pierre Gasly would be a better fit. Like, I know that maybe, in the past he didn't get on with some of the mechanics and things like that, but, he's definitely matured as a driver, and I think that he would be a better number 2 driver, and I think he'd take that. I think that there's so many across the grid. Nico Hulkenburg, if they'd managed to get that in before he'd gone to Audi.
Could you imagine that? That would have been a really interesting move.
Such a solid move as well. Like, he would have taken it. He would have finally got a podium, and he's consistent, and he would have been a far better option than Perez. Maybe I am forgetting how good Perez was, back in his heyday in the midfield, with Force India and Racing Point and things like that. But still, I think he's getting on a bit, and it's so early, this decision. I think if he's going throughout the rest of the season, his performances have already dropped off.
Yeah.
He's done it in the past couple of years where his performance at the start of the season have been quite strong, and it's been like, oh yeah, Perez, he's the perfect number 2 driver.
Yeah.
As we get into the European season, his performances just gradually drop off, and they could afford to do that in the last couple of years. This year, I don't think they can afford to do that, and I do think, even though they've given him a 2-year contract, I still actually don't think he's going to be there for the next 2 years.
Wow.
I think that his performances are going to continue to drop off, and it's going to get to a point where McLaren and Ferrari arguably already are on the same level as Red Bull, and Red Bull are going to be losing out in the constructors with Perez not making Q3 and things like that. He can't afford to do that anymore. The Red Bull isn't significantly better than those around him that he can just make that up. So yeah, I mean, I've said a lot there, but and it makes me sound like a huge Perez hater, but I just don't think he deserves to be in the best car on the grid. And I don't think that it's the right decision for Red Bull. They're just going to end up paying him loads of money. So, yeah, I don't think it was the right decision.
No, you're right. I mean, it's a case of, best car on the grid, but for how much longer as well. Ferrari and McLaren have both made seismic steps forward, which we sort of, saw coming at the start of the season. And to sort of, mention his performances, as soon as we started acknowledging his performances being really good this season, then he immediately starts to drop off. So you've mugged us off right there, Sergio Perez. But no, I think, you are right. There are certainly a lot more drivers more deserving of that seat. And they've given themselves this headache, Red Bull, where they want to promote Daniel Ricciardo, even though he's clearly not the driver that he used to be. And they obviously are trying to actively avoid a world in which Tsunoda is driving for the main team. And I'm not particularly sure why. I mean, if I had to sort of, I don't know, put my finger on anything, it'd be a case of, he's a bit of a character.
Yeah.
And maybe they see him as a genuine threat to Max Verstappen. If they want to run the team with a genuine first and second driver format, then Tsunoda's obviously not going to be a fan of that. They might have even, maybe behind the scenes there have been conversations and they've said to him, right, okay, we are happy to promote you, but you will be the second driver. And whether you like it or not, put up, shut up, whatever. This is Max's team. And it has been Max's team since Daniel Ricciardo used to be driving for them. So, it is a case of, the hierarchy there. Would a lot of the drivers be content with being Max's number 2? And with Perez not really having many options elsewhere, it does feel as though that maybe it's just the easiest decision for them. And it's a case of, as a number 2 driver, Perez has been okay. They've got some Constructors' Championships under their belts with him at the helm. Last season it was the first sort of Red Bull 1-2 I think they've ever had in the Drivers' Championship. And so, so far, okay from Perez. It's not been amazing. He's not set the world alight, but it's a case of once the McLaren and Ferrari do eventually begin to catch up, will that sort of difference in pace between Max and Perez be apparent in a sense of Max will be the only one of the 2 Red Bulls fighting in a championship situation? Perez, you've got someone there to pick up the pieces after Max finishes the race with a minute to spare and stuff like that. And then, if you're in a genuine championship fight and Perez hasn't proven to be quick enough, is this a bit of a risk, especially heading into the final season of these current regulations where it is probably the most tight and most competitive? I mean, you look at just before these current ones came in 2022, we had a genuine championship fight between 2 different teams, i.e. Red Bull and Mercedes, Max and Lewis, and then you saw the number 2 setup work there. Bottas a million miles away from Hamilton, Perez not quite to the same extent as the situation at Mercedes, but he picked up some race wins here and there, but it was still a pretty big difference. You look to the season finale, and Perez was so far behind Max, he could then compromise Lewis's race out of sync with the strategy, and that's when it worked perfectly. When Perez was willing to just take that number 2 role, as he still, I'm sure, is continuing to do so. But it's it's this weird sort of complex that they've got going on at Red Bull, where they just want Max Verstappen to remain untouchable. And I don't know, it just seems very unambitious, especially considering how blind we are going into 2026. Jenson Button described it as the biggest regulation change since he's been in the sport. And that's saying something. He's been around for the hybrid era, conversion and stuff like that. He's had multiple different engines. It says a lot about how mega this change is going to be in 2026 in 2 years' time. So I don't know. It's just unambitious. I'd say a bit of a risk as well if Red Bull do drop off a little bit. Perez might not be the number 2 driver that they want. They might someone who is just genuinely a little bit quicker, a little bit younger as well, to set the foundations for the team's future. Someone that can maybe Max Verstappen could hand the baton to, because he's one of them drivers that is likely to retire a little bit earlier because he just doesn't have that same need for record breaking and stuff like that. So maybe if they could have gone with someone with a bit more potential, a bit more room to grow, a higher ceiling, someone like Tsunoda, someone like Liam Lawson, for example, or if they look further afield and sign someone like maybe Lando Norris in the ideal world, but that looks like that he's never leaving McLaren, I don't think, anyway. And or they could have maybe tried a bit harder for Lewis Hamilton. That's sort of a bit contradictory, but there is no doubt that he is a quicker driver than Perez. Maybe not this season, but
could they have gone hell for leather for Kimi Antonelli? That would have been
hilarious.
That would have been pretty exciting.
That would have been unreal. But I think there's no way Mercedes would have allowed that to happen. I think that would have been just vetoed completely. But that would have been very cool to see. So that's enough about Sergio Perez now. I think we'll move on to a driver that has still no seat for next year, never mind 2026, and that's Carlos Sainz. Now, rumours are around the paddock that he has sort of whittled down his options to 2 teams, one of them being Audi, which is where a lot of people first anticipated he would go. There was, a lot of people were expecting like an immediate announcement once he left Ferrari, of course, with his dad's history, driving in the rally championships for Audi, and of course, they've got big budget, big funding, great backing going into the new regulations. Okay, kick Sauber, only team to have not scored points this season, but when Audi, take the reins, a lot of racing pedigree there, it looks like that team could make a step forward. And the other team is Williams, which would mean that my prediction that we made at the start of the year, the 2025 driver transfer predictions, I did say that Carlos Sainz would go to Williams. So I really, really want that to come true, because that would do me wonders in this prediction championship fight if we do include those.
I think we should, yeah.
I think we will. So so Seb, if you were Carlos Sainz, where would you go? Williams or Kick Sauber? Or anywhere else?
I mean, it's tough because I think the only other seat that I think is on offer for him, because I don't think the Mercedes seat is on offer for him, or the Red Bull. No. The only one that I think is else other than those two would be Alpine.
Yeah,
so I think it's between those three.
Yeah.
And I think Alpine's not going to go to Alpine.
No.
It's a tough one because you think Audi have this sort of potential that's, we don't know how much they're going to put into it. But, if some of the rumours are true that they're really going to go for it, then it's like, that seems like the place that would be the best direction to go in, because they've got untapped potential. They're going to be, a works team. So there's like that sort of potential that they could, they're going to understand everything better. But at the same time, they're super inexperienced. There will be, they've been showing so far, because, Audi own the team, I think, technically at the moment anyway. And they've made a couple of changes and things like that. And, they look awful. And he is going to be throwing away a year of his career, definitely, if he's going there next year. But at the same time, you could say the same about Williams. Williams are not going to make it the step up where he's going to be competing for anything next year. I think I would go to Audi just because, as much as I like James Vowles and I like the thinking, I do think that ultimately, even though they've got the Dorilton investment, things like that, I do think ultimately Williams are more confined to being a small team. I think just the setup around them and things like that, and I know historically they are a big team, but I just don't see enough of a change. They're always going to be a sort of an engine, buyer. I don't know what the hell you call
customer,
that. Yeah, customer team. They're always going to be a customer team. Whereas Audi, there's just potential. And I think at his point in his career, he has to take a risk. Yeah, and I think Williams is a safer move because they're going to be better probably than Sauber next year. And maybe in 2026, there's less chance of them getting it wrong because they're going to be using the Mercedes power unit, and apparently that's going to be really good and things like that. And they've got a lot of experience, and they've got James Vowles, a good head. So it's less risky, but I think he has to take the risk, and I think you have to take the risk to get the rewards. And I think Audi it could end up being a far worse option, but I think that I would go for that risk.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Williams at the moment, and James Vowles has made it pretty clear that 2024 and 2025 have been, or are going to be, and currently are, throwaway years. So it's a case of they're focusing all of their budget, all of their attention onto 2026 so they can make a good start with these new regulations. And that's a pretty smart move to make, considering there really wasn't much sort of more room to climb up the ladder, considering the jump between the sort of top half of the pack and the bottom half. That sort of there isn't really any sort of middle ground in the midfield. You're either slow or you're sort of quick and fighting for the points. Yeah, it's quite an exclusive club, that top 10 now. And so Williams, they only score in their first points of the season, however many rounds in at Monaco, and it's clear that they haven't made them same forward steps as they had done when Albon first joined the team, and that sort of last year that George Russell was part of the team, and it's slowed down a little bit, and that's probably going to dissuade Carlos Sainz from joining them immediately, because of course 2025 final year before the regulations, he doesn't really want to be in a terrible car, but chances are he's not going to have any choice. Like you said, Mercedes are desperate to promote Antonelli for 2025, and they sort of they don't really like this idea of Antonelli going to Williams for that first season, acclimatizing himself into a different team, and then throwing him into the main team. Better to just chuck him in the deep end and maybe sort of acknowledge the fact that his first season might not be as strong as maybe some people would think. So they want Antonelli. I mean, Haas, haven't they got an open seat? I mean, that is. I guess so. No one's really talked about it.
Ocon seems the one for Haas, isn't it? And Haas, I think, is a similar situation to
Ollie
Williams.
Behrman as well. I think that's a pretty much guaranteed seat at this point.
I think Haas is just the sort of thing that was like, if you're going to Haas are never going to win a world championship. In any simulation we go through, Haas are never going to win anything. Even
without Andretti backing?
Even with Andretti backing.
I
honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I'd like it to, but I think that is a huge risk, huge risk. I know they've had some performance this year, but I think that's just because other teams have taken different steps, different approach. I think the big ones, Alpine, they've taken a completely different approach. I think when they get up to scratch, they're going to be ahead of Haas, and arguably they're already on a similar level, like playing field. I do think, actually, maybe I wrote it off, but Alpine, if you think Alpine compared to Williams, where would you rather be? Alpine being a constructor, and obviously a constructor, but you know what I mean, a works team. And they've obviously put a lot of effort into the 2026 as well. And, I know Renault haven't been completely reliable when it comes to getting the new regs right. But I think Alpine would be a better option. I think he would be able to go in there, potentially be a team leader. I think he'd be able to compete well with Pierre. And I think that would be a solid option. But again, it would be a risk. But would it be more of a risk than Audi? I don't know.
I mean, what we've seen from Alpine this season is, that could dissuade anyone from ever joining them. But I think, you're right in terms of it'd be a much friendlier atmosphere with Sainz there as Gasly's teammate than, of course, Esteban Ocon, who we will talk more about in just a second. But, it's a case of, going back to the team that didn't properly back him in the first place. And, the second that he, had that open seat available at McLaren, he took it. It was clear that, he wasn't impressed with their development and they weren't too impressed with his performance. And it just didn't really click. And in this sort of time now, where they're in a much worse situation to what they were in 2018. They were the best of the rest. They were top 4 in the constructors, and they were knocking on the door of the top 3 and trying to sort of break into that sort of race winning caliber. And yet they have made sort of fluctuating steps forwards and backwards, but this one has been the most ginormous step backwards yet. They have been terrible, and I don't know, I think it's a case of with Williams, at least you've got some sort of stability there. Same with Sauber, I guess. Okay, while it's unpredictable to see how Audi's influence will affect the team, for a fact what you're getting yourself into. And with Alpine, just that uncertainty, maybe, is that really necessary? And the stress that could cause, I'm not too sure. I think, of course, obviously, Sainz has whittled it down, so it obviously means it's more likely that he will join Sauber and Williams. I think they are just the two best options for him available now anyway, considering that, of course, Ferrari were the ones that kicked him out, and Red Bull have, shut up shop. Mercedes, probably going to announce Antonelli at some point this season. Haas, like you said, there is literally no point in joining Haas, especially at this sort of at this stage in Carlos Sainz's career. Trying to think of the other teams now. Aston Martin probably going to shut up shop pretty soon. I mean, they've already signed Alonso on for another year, and there is that sort of that trajectory in which Yuki Tsunoda could probably join the team once Honda have more influence. And it just seems as though they're the only teams with the two doors open. And I think if I were him, I'd join Williams. I'd say maybe just because I want him to, simply because of the predictions. But I just think. You know what you're getting yourself into in 2025. It will be a wasteful year, but you could learn a lot about yourself as a driver in that year. You can learn a lot about the team, and it'll just be a really easy way to you won't have any scrutiny basically, because the car will be bad. You, I guess, can get away with being pretty bad. Of course, Albon will do his best to sort of, get the best out of it, of course, as any driver would. And so you've got some competition there, and you can, there will be a fun battle between the two of them if that is the move that happens. And then 2026, who knows how quick Williams could be. I mean, I did say at the start of the season that they were, and I quote, cooking, but I don't know, I'm starting to maybe think that was jumping the gun a bit. But, we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. We will see. But my money's on Williams, so is yours on...
I think he will join Williams.
Yeah.
I think he should join Audi.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I know better than you, Carlos.
If we move on now to someone that we briefly just touched on there, Esteban Ocon. Now, the big talking point coming away from, one of them anyway, away from the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, of course, alongside Charles Leclerc's Monaco curse being broken, is that Esteban Ocon, he was set to be replaced immediately, pretty much, for this Canadian Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Jack Doohan was the likely replacement. And if you missed the Monaco Grand Prix, basically, on the opening lap, there was just a collision between the two of them. Ocon, it was, of course, Ocon's fault. Sent it down the inside of, is it Portier?
Yeah.
Just the corner just before the tunnel, so sort of like quite slow, quite right angled. You've got a pretty pivotal corner on the first lap because you can make a move here and there. But we have seen pretty similar incidents there in recent years. I'm pretty sure Perez got in some sort of kerfuffle there not too long ago.
In qualifying.
Yeah. And so, it's a pretty sort of important corner on the track. And basically, Ocon just sent it up the inside of Gasly. Perfectly reasonable thought process, but of course it was just not on. The move wasn't on. Ocon's fault. He held his hands up, took the blame. But then Alpine, Bruno Faman was furious with him, and and rightly so. He's cost himself the race. Huge blow to Pierre Gasly's potential finish and stuff like that. And it was just a really weird sort of reaction from the team, considering we see those sorts of moves all the time. A dive bomb down the inside on the opening lap where the move isn't necessarily on. And yet here they are kicking him out of the team. The news that has followed from the Monaco Grand Prix weekend is that Esteban Ocon will be leaving the team at the end of the season, and he'll be looking for a seat as well. So, I mean, Seb, is it an overreaction from Alpine, especially considering how he has been pretty quick this season? He's been there for, ages now. Why are they kicking him out?
I think there were rumours before even Monaco that he was, he's made it clear he's been looking for, a seat elsewhere. He obviously at the start of the season he was banging on about I've got links to Mercedes.
Yeah.
So I think that along with the fact obviously he doesn't get on with Gasly, and even though they've worked quite well together, there's always been that underlying tension, and you never think that truly that either of them are going to be actual team players to each other.
No.
Really, when it comes down to it, they're not going to.
In hindsight, just terrible decision, basically.
Yeah, it was a weird one because it was realistically it was the only option they had left. That Pierre was the only driver left that they could get that was actually competitive.
Of course, great driver, but for those of you unfamiliar, Ocon and Gasly have hated each other for a good few years now. Yeah,
it's so. But do I think it's harsh? I don't. I think the way they've timed it, I think they'd already decided it quite a long time ago. I think they wanted to go down either Ocon or Gasly as a clear team leader, and I think that Gasly proved last year that ultimately when he gets to the grips with the car, I do think he has a little bit more potential. He's more marketable. He's got a lot more fans. Well, he's got at least one fan. And yeah, I think he's just slightly less controversial, and he seems a little bit more of a team player. And I think the way they've announced, I think they have announced it to punish him. Yeah. I think that if they were being kind, I think they would have announced it, a few weeks' time.
Mel C. Esteban type of...
maybe like an emotional video and things like that, and it just make it seem a lot more of a mutual agreement. I think them timing it straight after he's had this big incident, and straight after Bruno Famin's been talking to the press about how, furious he was, I think it's a clear statement to be like, no, we are getting rid of you, even though I think it was already decided. I think it is the right decision. I think ultimately, I know a bias coming in here as a Pierre fan, but I do think Pierre is a better driver than Ocon, with the potential of him being able to control the fundamentals of the development of the car. I think will put them in a better space going forward. And I think having a teammate, potentially Jack Doohan, who we think is going to come in, I think that having that, and he's been a good team leader when he was with Yuki Tsunoda, and I think when he's had a driver that is inferior to him, he has stepped up to the plate. You think Brendan Hartley and Daniel Kvyat and things like that, he had the strongest years of his career at that point. And I think it's a smart decision. I think for Ocon, I think as well, I think he's clearly a bit tired of that environment. I think he wanted to leave just because of the way Alpine have been, and I think that that's fine for him. The thing is, though, it's left him in a spot where the only seat realistically that I think he's got on offer is Haas. And that is, I do think, a backward step, even though Haas have been okay.
It makes so much sense, though. Esteban Ocon driving for Haas, it just clicks.
It clicks. And that Netflix, they're going to be loving that. It would have been great if, whatever his name was, what's his name?
Ollie Behrman?
No, former team principal
of Haas.
Gunther Steiner. I always forget his name. I don't know why, even though he's performing in the Octagon Centre. He's
I wouldn't say performing. I think it's one of them sort of live Q&A type things.
Weird.
An evening with Gunther Steiner. Can't wait for that. 50 quid for them, by the way.
That's crazy. That is ridiculous. But if they'd been together, that would have been crazy. But I do think for Haas, it's a strange one. I think you have to take it because he's such a quick driver that you can't say no to that.
It's a great pickup, yeah.
But it is a case of, fine, it looks like there's a bit of stability at Haas. And I think it has been overblown, this Ocon being a terrible teammate sort of thing. I think it's been blown out of proportion. But there is obviously that reputation he comes with. And I think maybe, is that the right decision for them? I think it is, but I think there could be some risk attached to it, Yeah. I think Behrman's not going to settle for being a second driver. So I do think there could be some clashes there. But yeah, it's a tough one for Ocon. I do feel for him in a sense that, he had that team built around him. They basically ditched Piastri because of Ocon, so they could keep Ocon, the French home hero, and it's gone downhill very quickly for him.
No, yeah, you were saying this before we started recording. This sort of, you could sort of argue that it has been Ocon's team, really. Yeah. He joined in 2020, right? Yeah, 2020, replacing Hulkenberg and no one else. Yeah, just replacing Hulkenberg. And Ricciardo was considerably quicker in that 2020 season, but they kept him on anyway. Fernando Alonso comes in, and Fernando was quicker in that first season, but of course Esteban got them that win in Hungary. And then, the next season after that, Fernando was on track quicker, but of course they finished on, I think Ocon finished ahead of him in points in the championship. And so they've clearly kept a lot of faith in a driver that has caused some issues, because, Ricciardo left the team, maybe not because of Ocon, because there was too much of a gap in performance there. But, Fernando made it pretty clear that he and Ocon fell out towards the end of his time at Alpine. And then, you look at the friction friction that he's had with Gasly since he arrived in the team. It's so strange because he has got a track record, Ocon, of not getting on with his teammates. Look at his relationship with Sergio Perez at what was at the time Force India before he then was kicked out of the sport for a few years. And it's so strange because you look back at all them old Drive to Survive episodes where he's sort of walking around the Mercedes crew. He seems so innocent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, he's got such a good background. On paper, he's such a likeable driver.
He's a driver that you really want to do well. Yeah.
But he does so much where you think, just come on. Right, Ocon, come on, you're better than this. And I think he knows it, and I think so I feel really bad for him, but it's just how it works, isn't it?
He maybe got that sort of chip on his shoulder, considering that he is one of the very few working class, working class background F1 drivers that have sacrificed everything to get on the grid.
So much pressure on him as well, and you do understand at points like he's come from a background where he had to fight so hard for it, and there was so much pressure on every single race essentially he had, that he's such an aggressive driver because of that. And it's like you can understand it, but at times it is just too much, and it's really disappointing because he's such a quick driver as well.
He is.
He's got so much potential.
I can't help but feel that the Esteban Ocon that we sort of saw in, particularly 2018, 2017, he was tipped to be the next big thing. And with, and why not? Some of the results, his consistency was remarkable for someone so young and inexperienced at the time. He really was something special. I don't think he will. Well, he certainly hasn't yet, and he hasn't achieved that sort of potential that people sort of branded him with at the start of his career. I don't think he ever will either.
He hasn't had a car as good as then.
No,
as well,
he's not. He's not. That sort of it was covered in Drive to Survive, but that sort of P3 on the grid in like Belgium 2017. It was chucking it down with rain in qualifying, and he, despite the fact that he'd been in F1 for less than 2 full seasons, sort of strangled the car around the track in terrible conditions. We've seen some amazing highlights from Esteban Ocon. That podium last year at Monaco, and of course the race win at Hungary. He's a driver that has accomplished a lot in a very sort of tumultuous F1 career, and so Haas will be lucky to have him, I'd say. It's been a questionable sort of year and a half so far from Ocon. Really strong at the start of last season. Performance dropped off, was outperformed by Gasly, full stop. This season again, really great start to the year, but he had a terrible car, and then of course this incident in Monaco. It's just strange. I don't understand why Alpine would have kicked him out before this incident. I don't know. It seems like some sort of weird reaction to something. There was probably just some sort of personal fallout, I reckon. I think maybe the working environment was too tense. But this is all just speculation.
It's sad for Ocon, but I think it will be good for him as well to get out of that sort of environment, go to a team where there is ultimately less pressure, and be able to have a team that I think if he can be the team leader, the full team leader, because he's never had that.
No,
realistically. When Ricciardo came in, he was obviously when Perez's teammate, he wasn't the clear team leader. No. Ricciardo came in, and all the hype around him, and how much they wanted to base the team around Ricciardo, and then Fernando Alonso coming in, and then Pierre Gasly, who's never going to settle for being a second driver to Ocon.
No, of course not.
So this, I think, will be the first time he's really been able to have a team and put it in his direction.
Yeah, especially with that young teammate Ollie Behrman, because it's all but confirmed really that Haas seat for Ollie Behrman. They want to promote him. He is good enough. That excellent sort of showing in the Ferrari around Jeddah, and he's younger than us, so
exactly.
he'll be that perfect number 2 driver to Ocon. Loads of potential. He seems like a well coordinated guy. He seems like I don't know how to put it, but I don't think there'll be too many disagreements between him and Ocon, unless on track they just come together all the time. But it's one of them where I think you are spot on there. If he is a team leader, if they can sort of not build the whole team around him per se, but if they can lay the foundations for Ocon's success, then maybe there could be a decent step forward for him wherever he goes. If he does go to Haas, it would just be a move that makes a lot of sense, I'd say. And obviously wouldn't have anticipated it at the start of the season. I'm pretty sure we all said in that predictions video that it would be the same driver pairing,
apart from me saying Pierre to Mercedes.
Oh yeah, of course.
We'll ignore that.
We all said that Ocon would stay put. So interesting to see where that will go.